talking about, what is it going to take to get beyond where you are? Because I remember one point you said you were...
Y'all, nobody was ready for this. 2 men, 2 completely different lives. 1 woman, and 1 shocking sit-down that just flipped the entire celebrity world upside down. This wasn't a screaming match. This wasn't clout chasing. This was colder than that. Cameras rolled. Simon Guobadia on one side, Dennis McKinley on the other. No smiles, no jokes, just heavy eyes, tired faces, and years of silence finally breaking. Simon leaned forward and said something that froze the room. "I didn't lose money. I lost trust. And that betrayal cost more than anything I own." And that's when everything exploded. According to Simon, this was never about love. It was strategy, a calculated move disguised as marriage. He claims Porsha didn't see a husband. She saw access. Access to wealth. Access to status. Access to a lifestyle she allegedly planned to control. But when the prenup blocked her path, when the money didn't move the way she expected, he says the story flipped. Suddenly, Simon became the villain. Suddenly, she became the victim. And suddenly, divorce papers hit like a weapon. Then Dennis spoke. And that's when the story turned tragic. He admitted they were never married. Just a relationship. One that allegedly gave her emotional support, physical access, and eventually a child. And according to Dennis, the moment their daughter was born, she walked away. No explanations. No closure. Just silence. But the real shock? Both men claimed they were being played at the same time. Hidden from each other. Surrounded by secrets. And allegedly, they weren't the only ones. Multiple affairs. Multiple lies. Multiple versions of the truth sold to the public. Tears. Narratives. Victim stories. Now the silence is gone. And the question shaking the internet is simple. Were they exposed, or was Porsha exposed? Stay with us, because this story only gets darker from here.
Through a lot these last few months, and everything was good. But, I made a mistake. I cheated, and...
It's not a mistake. A mistake to me is like take the wrong exit. You don't make a mistake and set up with someone and cheat. That's not where he needs to be in order for me to heal and in order for me to move forward.
Okay.
He has to be in a place, in my eyes, taking full accountability for his actions, period, no matter how.
Buckle up, because what you're about to hear isn't a love story, it isn't a breakup story, and it definitely isn't a fairy tale. It's a slow burn tragedy wrapped in power, fame, and allegations that refuse to stay buried. In a quiet room that felt more like a courtroom than an interview space, 2 men sat apart, not looking at each other, not looking at the cameras either. No lawyers visible. No grand speeches. Just tension hanging heavy in the air, like everyone already knew something ugly was about to be said. This wasn't about clearing names. This felt like testimony. According to claims now circulating, this was the first time Simon Guobadia and Dennis McKinley were in the same space to address the same woman. Not together as allies by choice, but bound by a shared realization that came too late. They weren't enemies. They were exhibits. Simon spoke first. Calm. Controlled. Almost clinical. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He alleged that what the public saw as romance was, in his words, a transaction disguised as destiny. He claimed the marriage wasn't rushed by love, but engineered by opportunity. Every move, every public appearance, every affectionate moment allegedly had a purpose beyond emotion. He said trust was the real currency he handed over, and once it was spent, it was never coming back. From Simon's perspective, the story began to fracture the moment control didn't land where it was expected to. He claimed boundaries were mistaken for betrayal, and protection was recast as cruelty. According to him, when wealth didn't become ownership, the narrative shifted. He alleged he was slowly repainted in public as the villain in a story he didn't know he was auditioning for. Then came the allegations of manipulation. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet, steady claims that reputations were shaped the same way relationships were, strategically. He implied that public sympathy became a shield and tears became tools. Again, these are allegations. But the weight of them sat heavy. Then Dennis spoke, and the room changed. His tone wasn't angry. It was broken. He didn't frame his words like an accusation. He framed them like a confession he'd been holding too long. He admitted there was no marriage. No vows. Just a relationship built on presence, intimacy, and hope. And a child. According to Dennis, that child became the pivot point. He alleged that once their daughter was born, the dynamic didn't deepen, it disappeared. Calls slowed. Promises faded. And the relationship he thought was evolving allegedly became irrelevant overnight. He didn't accuse her of abandoning motherhood. He accused her of abandoning him. He claimed he went from partner to placeholder, from present to past tense. And while the world watched a confident public image, he alleged he was dealing with silence behind closed doors. Then came the allegation that stunned even seasoned observers. Both men, separately but now publicly, claimed they were never alone in the story. According to them, there were other men, other timelines, other versions of reality running parallel, hidden just well enough to avoid collision until now. They alleged overlap, emotional overlap, physical overlap, financial overlap, a pattern where truth depended on who was asking. From this perspective, the scandal wasn't infidelity alone. It was orchestration. The courtroom-like tension intensified when public statements were brought up. Social media posts, interviews, carefully framed soundbites. According to both men, they alleged those narratives painted them as opposites of who they believed themselves to be. One as controlling, one as disposable, both as necessary villains to support a larger image. And that's where the tragedy deepened. Because Dennis spoke about his daughter again. About growing up one day and reading headlines she never asked to be part of. About realizing her origin story might always be debated by strangers online. He didn't cry. He paused. And that pause said more than words. Simon, on the other hand, spoke of loss that couldn't be measured. Not just financial cost, but psychological erosion. He claimed trust didn't just break, it dissolved. He implied that being painted publicly while staying silent privately was a punishment he didn't see coming. Outside that room, the reaction was immediate. Social media erupted. Lines were drawn. Some called it accountability. Others called it character assassination. Supporters of Porsha labeled the men bitter. Supporters of the men called her calculated. And the truth? It got louder and harder to hear. What made this different wasn't the scandal. Celebrity scandals are common. What made this different was the alignment. Two men from different chapters allegedly telling fragments of the same story. Not rehearsed. Not synchronized. Just overlapping enough to raise questions no PR team could silence. No verdict was delivered. No final judgment made. Just claims placed on the record of public opinion. And like every real courtroom drama, the most important figure wasn't present. Her silence echoed louder than any statement. Because in the end, this wasn't about who spoke first. It was about who controlled the story last. The silence didn't clear anything. If anything, it thickened. After those claims hit the air, what followed wasn't clarification, it was escalation. Every pause, every refusal to respond, every carefully worded non-statement only fueled the sense that something deeper was being avoided. In situations like this, absence doesn't calm speculation. It feeds it. According to people close to the situation, the days that followed felt less like damage control and more like crisis containment. Old interviews were pulled back into circulation. Clips resurfaced that once felt harmless but now sounded different. Words that were praised months ago were suddenly dissected line by line, tone by tone, as if they were sworn testimony. From a distance, it looked chaotic. Up close, it looked calculated. Observers began pointing out timing, the order of relationships, the overlap that had once been dismissed as coincidence. Allegedly, the narrative that had been sold to the public no longer aligned cleanly with the timeline being quietly reconstructed by online investigators and industry insiders. And once timelines crack, stories unravel fast. Simon's claims took on a sharper edge when attention shifted to reputation management. He didn't accuse outright sabotage, but he implied something just as damaging, that silence had been weaponized against him. According to him, moments where he chose restraint were later framed as guilt. Distance was recast as control. Privacy became secrecy. He suggested that once the relationship ended, the strategy changed. The public version of events, he claimed, was no longer about healing, but about positioning. And positioning, in this industry, determines who survives the fallout. Dennis, meanwhile, found himself in a different storm. Sympathy didn't come cleanly. Questions followed him everywhere. Why stay quiet for so long? Why speak now? His response wasn't polished. He didn't frame it as redemption. He framed it as exhaustion. According to him, living inside a narrative you don't recognize slowly erodes you.
Reality TV star when the cameras weren't rolling.
Publicly didn't reflect the man raising a child privately. He said the hardest part wasn't being misunderstood. It was watching his daughter's existence become a talking point rather than a truth. And that's where the tragedy sharpened. Because children don't get to opt out of scandals built by adults. The conversation shifted again when allegations of emotional compartmentalization surfaced. According to the claims, affection was distributed strategically, not emotionally. Different versions of intimacy offered to different people, each tailored to what they could provide. Not everyone was meant to stay. Some were meant to serve a phase. If true, that reframes everything. It turns heartbreak into infrastructure. Industry voices began weighing in without naming names. Former associates spoke vaguely about patterns they'd noticed but ignored. Friends hinted at warnings that were dismissed. Nothing concrete. Nothing provable. Just enough smoke to keep the fire alive. And then there was the money conversation. Not accusations of theft, but of expectation. Simon allegedly suggested that financial access was assumed rather than negotiated. That refusal was interpreted as betrayal. That independence was framed as hostility. Again, these are claims, not conclusions. But in a courtroom of public opinion, perception often outruns proof. Dennis Payne surfaced differently. He spoke about absence, missed moments, watching milestones from the margins. He didn't accuse parental alienation directly, but he described a dynamic where presence felt conditional, where access came with emotional cost, where silence followed compliance and resistance led to distance. The internet did what it always does. It chose sides. Some called the men bitter and bruised. Others called them victims who stayed quiet too long. Supporters of Porsha argued that powerful men don't like losing control of narratives. Critics argued that powerful women don't get believed when multiple people speak against them. And somewhere in that noise, the truth fractured further. What unsettled many wasn't the accusations themselves, but how seamlessly they aligned. Two men from different timelines, different emotional investments, describing patterns that sounded uncomfortably similar. Not identical stories, overlapping ones. Enough to make dismissal feel premature. No response came. No statement. No rebuttal. That silence began to look less like dignity and more like strategy. Because in scandals like this, timing is everything. Speaking too soon locks you into a version of events. Speaking too late lets others define it for you. And not speaking at all allows speculation to metastasize. Behind the scenes, sources claimed pressure was mounting. Not from fans, from brands. From networks. From people whose business depends on stability, not controversy. Silence may protect legally, but it bleeds commercially. Dennis addressed this indirectly. He said he knew speaking would cost him opportunities, relationships, peace. But he claimed staying silent had already cost him something worse, his voice. Simon echoed that sentiment in a different way. He said the hardest part wasn't being painted as the villain. It was realizing how quickly the world accepts a story when it fits a familiar script. Wealthy man, younger woman, power imbalance. It didn't matter what happened privately once the narrative locked publicly. That's when the situation crossed from scandal into spectacle. Because now it wasn't about what happened. It was about who gets believed. Legal analysts cautioned restraint. Publicists urged silence. Friends urged patience. But patience is expensive when reputations are hemorrhaging in real time. And every day, without response felt like another brick laid on a one-sided monument. The tragedy here isn't just broken relationships. It's the way truth becomes negotiable once fame enters the room. How emotion turns into currency. How pain becomes content. And still, the central figure remained unseen. No interviews. No statements. No clarifications. Just an image carefully maintained while others dismantled themselves publicly. As a faceless observer watching this unfold, one thing becomes clear. This isn't about love lost. It's about narrative ownership. About who gets to frame the past and profit from the future. Because when stories collide like this, innocence isn't proven by silence, it's questioned by it. And as the noise grows louder, one reality settles in quietly. This isn't over. The testimony has only begun. The pressure didn't break anything open, it exposed how fragile everything already was. As the weeks stretched on, what once felt like a scandal hardened into something more permanent. Lines weren't just drawn online anymore. They were etched into careers, reputations, and private lives that could no longer be separated from public judgment. Every appearance, every absence, every archived clip became evidence in a trial no one officially agreed to but everyone participated in. According to people monitoring the fallout closely, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. The language around the situation changed. It stopped being about relationships and started being about patterns. Not what happened once, but what allegedly kept happening. Not who was hurt, but how often similar outcomes followed similar choices. That's when the narrative reached a dangerous point. Because patterns invite conclusions. Whispers began circulating about how certain conflicts were always framed the same way. How accountability seemed to fall outward, never inward. How sympathy appeared on schedule, while rebuttals arrived late or not at all. None of this was proven. All of it was discussed. And discussion, when amplified, becomes judgment. Simon, according to sources, withdrew even further. Not out of defeat, but calculation. He reportedly understood that anything he said now would be filtered through a lens already set. In cases like this, silence doesn't mean surrender, it means refusing to feed a story that survives on reaction. But silence has consequences. Industry insiders allegedly began reassessing associations. Invitations slowed. Endorsements paused. Not because of guilt, but because controversy makes people nervous. The truth doesn't need to be settled for damage to be done. Dennis felt that damage differently. He remained visible, but heavier. Less guarded, more exposed. He spoke about nights spent explaining headlines to family members who didn't understand why private pain had become public debate. He described the exhaustion of defending your intentions while protecting a child who didn't choose any of this. He didn't claim perfection. He claimed humanity. And that distinction mattered to some, but not all. Support fractured further. Those who once defended unconditionally began asking questions. Those who once doubted began listening. The internet, relentless as ever, demanded resolution in a story that offered none. Then came the moment that shifted tone again. Not a statement, not a leak. A reaction. A brief response, parsed endlessly, that avoided specifics but emphasized strength, resilience, and moving forward. No direct denials. No acknowledgments. Just distance. For some, that was dignified. For others, it was deafening. Because when multiple allegations align and the response stays abstract, interpretation fills the gap. And interpretation is rarely generous. Legal analysts weighed in cautiously. They pointed out what wasn't said mattered as much as what was. They reminded audiences that allegations aren't verdicts and silence isn't admission. But legal clarity doesn't always translate emotionally. The public doesn't wait for courtrooms. It builds its own. What emerged was a tragedy shaped not by one lie or one truth, but by competing versions of reality all demanding belief. Each side claimed harm. Each side claimed manipulation. And somewhere beneath all of it sat a child whose future would inevitably brush against this moment. That's the part no one can spin. Dennis returned to that point again, not as leverage but as sorrow. He talked about legacy, about what lasts after narratives fade, about how fame amplifies mistakes but never erases consequences. He didn't ask for sympathy. He asked for restraint. Simon's perspective sharpened toward reflection. He questioned how easily society accepts simplified villains and heroes. How quickly wealth becomes motive. How nuance disappears once a story becomes profitable. He suggested the most painful realization wasn't betrayal, it was replaceability. Not as a partner, but as a person. Reduced to a role that could be rewritten once it no longer served. As a faceless observer tracking this saga, the uncomfortable truth becomes impossible to ignore. None of these people are winning. Attention doesn't heal. Exposure doesn't resolve. And vindication, if it ever comes, arrives late and incomplete. The internet moved on, as it always does, to the next controversy. But this one lingered differently. Not because of shock value, but because of its emotional residue. Because it raised questions without answers. Because it showed how easily intimacy collapses under performance. And because it reminded everyone watching that truth in public life is rarely singular. Some will believe the men spoke out of pain. Some will believe they spoke out of pride. Some will believe silence is wisdom. Others will believe it's avoidance. What remains undeniable is that the story reshaped all of them. Reputations bent. Relationships dissolved. A child grew older in a louder world. And no matter how carefully future chapters are written, this one has already been archived, quoted, clipped, and remembered. Not as a conclusion, but as a caution. Because when love, power, and image collide, the wreckage doesn't announce itself with one dramatic moment. It unfolds slowly, publicly, and without mercy. And long after the cameras stop recording, the consequences keep speaking. This is the moment where the story stops being entertainment and starts becoming accountability. Because what you just witnessed wasn't gossip for clicks, it was a public unraveling. Careers shifted. Relationships collapsed. Narratives cracked under pressure. And the most uncomfortable part? No one walked away clean. Not the men who spoke. Not the woman who stayed silent. Not the audience that turned pain into debate. You can scroll past this and pretend it's just another celebrity mess. Or you can recognize what it really is, a warning about how power, image, and silence collide behind closed doors. Because when multiple people tell overlapping versions of the same story, ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It just gives it room to grow. Ask yourself why certain questions were never answered. Why timelines never aligned. Why emotion was allowed to replace explanation. And why public sympathy is so easily guided by whoever controls the microphone last. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about refusing to swallow polished narratives without asking who benefits from them. It's about understanding that fame doesn't erase accountability, and silence doesn't automatically equal innocence. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is where truth starts to surface. If it made you angry, even better, because anger means you're paying attention. And if it made you question what you thought you knew, then this story has already done its job. Don't let this end here. Share this. Talk about it. Break the cycle of selective outrage and manufactured innocence. The more stories like this get buried, the easier it becomes for the next one to happen. Because behind every headline is a real cost. Behind every carefully crafted image is a reality someone is living with. And behind every silence is a decision. Stay alert. Stay questioning. The truth doesn't need permission to exist, it needs witnesses.